Welcome to the Last in Line podcast, where we discuss faith, hope, and truth in the lives of amazing servant leaders. You are in the right place if you crave purpose and if you hunger for a life of significance. This podcast applies biblical truth to our daily lives, and we pray that you walk away encouraged and inspired. This is the Last in Line podcast.
Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Chris Morris to Last in Line podcast. He is a passionate mental health advocate dedicated to promoting understanding of mental health issues within the church. He has just released a book called Resilient and Redeemed, Lessons Learned Through Depression and Suicidality in the Psych Ward. Because of a lifelong struggle with depression, Chris became committed to breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health and encouraging others to seek after holistic health. As a writer and speaker, Chris has shared personal story and insights with audiences across the country. He inspired many individuals and empowered them to take control of their own health and break through from poor theological teaching or from just an unhealthy environment of social circles. He's published several books on mental health, and his work has been featured in a number of media outlets, including Crosswalk, The Mighty, and Fathom magazine. Chris is deeply committed to creating a more compassionate and supportive world and a church for individuals living with mental health issues. You get to hear about Chris's journey through a broken home, from a alcoholic, abusive father, to a mom having seizures, to getting married at a young age, and fast forward, Chris experiencing his own epilepsy and seizures that put him on going on a decade of disability. And so he's fought with some mental health from that, obviously. And he's had 2 bouts in the psych ward with suicidal thoughts or suicidal acts. And he's here today as living proof of redemption and resilience, God stepping in, intervening, speaking to him in a profound way that enabled Chris to see past his limitations and use his experiences to help other people going through the same thing. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Welcome, Chris Morris, to Last in Line podcast. Well, Chris Morris, hey man, welcome to Last in Line podcast. It is great to have you here, sir.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, it's good to meet you. This literally is our first conversation, our first meeting, and we got connected through your publisher and got some mutual contacts through that avenue that I've interviewed on the podcast in the past. And so I saw you on their list of books coming out. Now, technically, your new book isn't released till June. Is that correct?
Right, June 11th. It's available
Okay.
for pre-order now, though. Yeah.
Okay, pre-order. Good. So you're okay whenever we release this then from this point forward, this episode?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. The name of the book is Resilient and Redeemed, and lessons about suicidality, which I learned a new word there, and depression from the psych ward. So we're going to talk about some of your experiences, and I know that you've had some significant interaction with depression and talking about the psych ward. Like, we're going to go into some of that because I'd love to hear your story. But before we do that, and I read your intro before we recorded separately, but talk about some of your home life, maybe growing up as a teenager. Like I mentioned, we got a lot of dads of teenagers listening to this show. So I just want to kind of get your starting point of being a teenager, maybe how you came to Christ and as a believer, and kind of take us through some of those early years of your 20s as well.
Okay. Well, we're gonna hit suicidality pretty hard here then,
Okay.
because my story of meeting Christ is intimately related with a suicidal moment.
Okay.
You'll see what I mean in just a second.
Okay.
A little bit of background on the front end of that.
Mhm.
I was a kid from a divorced home. My dad was a violent, angry alcoholic, and after the divorce, I lived with my mom. Things were going It's about as okay as they can go for a kid coming from an abused home. And then I had a moment that shook me to the core of my being. I woke up one morning and went to go say good morning to my mom, and she was in the middle of having a seizure. And it was the trippiest thing. Mom, are you okay? She stopped seizing, goes, yeah, I'm fine. Just go get breakfast and check in on me. I should be okay. I'll be able to go to work. I might just be a few minutes late. So I'm like, okay. So I went and grabbed some cereal, fastest bowl of cereal I've ever had in my life. Went back and checked on my mom, and she was still in the middle of seizing. I ended up calling 911, and my mom, through a series of medical malpractice events, actually nearly died in the hospital. So I came face to face with this question because my mom was and is one of the nicest, kindest human beings I've ever met in my life. I was raised in an a-religious home. It wasn't Christian, it wasn't non-Christian. It was just, hey, we don't want to put our faith on you, so you figure it out. And I didn't figure anything out, so I sort of was agnostic. So I was praying, it put me into this crisis mode of, well, if this is how life works, if he's even real, can take a great person and almost remove her from the planet with no warning, what is up with that? So it started me on this quest where I looked into everything from, I kid you not, Norse mythology, because I thought having a god of thunder and a god of, having different gods for different categories sort of made sense. I looked into some new age stuff. This was around 14, so it was right at the beginning of high school. And I was just really exploring, and then I was not finding any answers. So I prayed this prayer that you should absolutely 100% never pray to God. And I said, God, I'm at the end of my rope. Life isn't making any sense to me. You've got 7 days to show yourself as real, or I'm out of here. I had a plan. My mom had a gun in the house, and I knew where it was, and I knew where the bullets were, the whole deal, and I was ready. And I sort of expected that nothing was going to happen because, again, I was agnostic / atheist at the time. Day 6, something very bizarre happened. The next door neighbor, who was my age, came in and invited me to her birthday party that was happening right then. I'd never met Julie before. It's like, knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm Julie. Want to come to my birthday party? I'm like, I don't know you. Why would I go to your birthday party? She goes, well, it's just a bunch of friends. I thought you would have. Well, I'm sort of busy right now. On the corner, the Legend of Zelda will be okay if you step away for an hour. And I finally succumbed to her to her asking me to come, mostly because I was tired of sort of arguing with her. I expected I'm gonna make my 5 minute showing at this random person's house, and then I'm gonna leave, and then she'll probably never bother me again. And instead, what happened? So, sort of to peek behind the curtain, I was the token pagan at the Christian birthday party. Everyone else who was there was from a youth group. I didn't know that, but what I experienced was the literal love and acceptance of Christ. I can look at it now and say that I experienced love and acceptance to the degree where I looked at someone and said, I don't understand why you're being so nice to me. I'm sort of a jerk. Why are you doing this? And he said to me, why don't you come to church and find out? Because it's about Christ. And in the back of my head, there's that clock ticking of, well, this will be day 7. I haven't really checked out Christianity yet. Let's see what happens. So I agreed to go to church. The youth pastor was preaching out of Romans chapter 8. He ended it with, the end of that chapter says, neither life nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate you from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. He said the most important thing, I'll never forget this. He said the most important thing is that phrase, in Christ Jesus. The love of God is inconquerable if you're in Christ. If you're not, then this is for you, but it's not applied to you yet. So if that rings true to you, then come talk to me, and I'll help you understand what it means to be in Christ. And I practically ran out of my chair. I can look back on it now and see what the Holy Spirit was moving. I didn't have language for that then. I was just like, whatever he's talking about, I need. And I went and I talked with him, and he led me to Christ, and I prayed a prayer of salvation then. And how that translates, and my terrible prayer to God is on day 7, God looked at a suicidal, angry young man and said, I want this one. I love this one. And my life has been changed. I'd love to tell you that my suicidality and my depression went away from that moment forward. I wouldn't have much of a story to tell. The book would be like that. It'd be a really short book.
Yeah.
But there was a season in my life, I think, because of the newness of my faith, where those dark seasons were sort of held at bay.
Yeah.
And up until I got married when I was 20, until about 22, 23, I had a reprieve from suicidality and depression.
So, yeah. So, as we get into the book a little later, I want to make sure I get the explanation from the psych ward that's part of the title, because something tells me that the story does change again after your early 20s. So before I do that, I want to play a little kind of an informal light game where you complete the sentence. Like, I create these sentences and then I just have you fill in the blank from your perspective, and you can elaborate. You can go wherever you want with it. But I have a couple, 2 or 3 here. So let's try this. How about that? I call it life sentence. Okay. So you're not being charged with any crime yet, but no. So let's start. Let's do a softball here. Pretty easy one, I guess. Blank is what I want people to take away from this book.
Hope and the belief that God is never done with someone because of a mental health diagnosis.
Nice. That's for somebody. I mean, there's a lot of people need to hear that. Okay, how about this one? That might have been a little too easy. Let me try to make it a little harder. This might be putting the cart before the horse, though. So if we got to go somewhere we were going to go later, that's okay. I set us up for failure on this one. So here we go. My aha moment of freedom from suicidal thoughts and depression was.
Yeah, that definitely was in the psych ward after my suicide attempt in 2020. I'm happy to tell that story.
Okay, so you got married at 20 and you kind of felt free from some of those chains and bondage of suicide and depression then for a time. So then fast forward, what year was that? When you, like, 2020, or when you were 20, so to 23, how old are you now?
I'm 47.
Okay, so in 2020, right? So 27 years later or 20 years later, I don't know exactly, but what was life getting just progressively more challenging and hopeless, or was there a significant fork in the road that got you to that place where you reverted back to some of those depressing thoughts and ways?
Yeah, I think the way I'd say it is I probably had about 6 or 7 years. So until 22, 23-ish, when I didn't have any struggles with depression or suicidal ideation. And then they slowly started coming back, and I just didn't have the skill to know what to do with them. So I tried to ignore them for a few years. Newsflash, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So they began to escalate. And then I talked to my pastor. This was probably early 2000s. I talked to my pastor at the time, and he was remarkably unhelpful. I can go into that story a little bit.
Well, because I got the feeling by reading some of the summary and synopsis of the book that you had an unpleasurable experience in the church when you were kind of seeking help for, I guess, a diagnosis that you might have gotten.
Yeah.
Did you receive a formal diagnosis of depression or mental, I don't know, disorder? I don't know what diagnosis it actually would be.
So sometime later, I received a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, MDD.
Okay. Okay.
Um, at that time, what I knew is I was struggling with depressive thoughts, and I
Mm,
was on the cusp of some suicidal ideations.
mm,
So after talking with my wife, after arguing with my wife,
mm,
yeah, I finally heard her when she said, "Chris, you need to get some outside help."
mm,
So I went and I spoke with my pastor, and I sort of laid out for him what I was experiencing.
mm,
And he looked at me, and John, he looked at me, and he just said 5 words. He said, "Man up and pray more." That was his diagnosis for me, was to man up and pray more. He said,
Okay.
if you were really a Christian, he said, you wouldn't be having these issues. If you were really praying faithfully,
Wow.
you wouldn't be having these issues. It was a disaster, dude.
Wow.
It set
Yeah,
me back
that's
a decade.
I I don't know I don't know how to react to that other than he was very insecure in his ability to help you, and those were the only places he knew to go, which definitely wasn't anything he learned in Bible school, I would almost guarantee. So I don't know how to explain that, but that's one of those hurts in church that people have and then they never go back, unless somebody, God gets a hold of them and changes their heart. But I could see where that would leave a mark. So when you left there, did you think, okay, I guess I just need to man up and pray more and figure this out? Or did you say, I think I need a second opinion? That one didn't quite work.
Yeah, I was really young and impressionable, and I bought what he said, hook, line, and sinker. It
Okay.
it, it pushed me farther down into dark
Mhm.
places, because then I was like, wow, is my faith even real? What's wrong with my faith that it's not working the way it's supposed to work? And I didn't have
Mm.
the capacity or the distance to be able to look at this and say, no, this was bad teaching. This was
Yeah.
bad pastoring.
Yeah.
This is a myth. There isn't a spiritual answer for every problem on the planet.
Hmm.
I just believed him. So what I learned in that moment, I didn't bail on church, although I mean, I didn't physically bail on church, but I definitely gave less of myself when I was physically there. If my wife wasn't committed to church, I probably would have bailed. It wasn't an argument I wanted to have with her. So I showed up and I went through the motions. But I learned that in some places, mental illness is not safe in church. So I learned to put on a mask and I
Mm.
learned to hide.
Yeah. Well, so do you go into in the book, do you go into depth as to, because it would be easy to just rail on the church, right? Throughout 200 pages of a book. Like that would be easy because there are a lot of gaps in the
Sure.
church, right? In the building of the church. There's a lot of, they're people, right? And we put them on a pedestal, but they're flawed and then they disappoint us. But there's a lot of gaps. It's not perfect. So other than, I'm assuming you didn't do that for 200 pages, what would you say to somebody that might be in a church with battling with some of the things you were battling with, that maybe they're fearful of exposing that, right? Being fearful of transparently disclosing some of that. What would be the best way to go about that, in your opinion, within the church anyway?
Yeah. And I I want to sort of sidebar on something you said. I absolutely don't spend 200 pages railing on the
Yeah,
church.
for sure.
It I love the church and I'm still in the church.
Hmm.
And you're right that it's not perfect, but I think it's John 6. after Jesus says some really weird things
Mm.
and a bunch of people leave him, he says to the disciples, "Are you going to leave too?" And they say, "Where would we go? You have the words of life."
That's
That's
right.
sort of where I land. Is the church is the arbiter of the words of life through
That's
Christ.
right. It's good.
So there's no other place to go. And
Mm.
so I just wanted to throw that out there real
Good.
quick
Yeah.
because I don't want to even. That's probably the one negative, really negative story that's in this book. The rest of it is more my journey through the
Yeah.
darkness that I needed to go through.
Yeah.
Um, so for someone who is in a church and is afraid
Hmm.
that maybe their struggles are not going to be seen right, what I would encourage them to do is to think about, hey, are the leaders of this church demonstrating patterns that show they're going to be safe individuals to share your problems with? And
Mm.
some of the ways you could identify that would be like in sermons, are they honest with their own shortcomings? And are they current shortcomings? Or is
Yeah.
it like back in 1973, when I was a new Christian, I used to struggle with this, but now praise Jesus, I'm free.
Hmm.
If that's the story that you're hearing from the pulpits, then there's a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance that maybe that's not a safe place.
Hmm.
And then other things you can do is you can look at just the simple, like in my church we have a mental health ministry. Does
Mm.
the church have a mental health ministry, or are there at least referral relationships set up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the sort of things that I would suggest, because you don't want to, I can look back on that the pastor that I spoke with back in the day, and there were things that helped me to recognize that had I had eyes to see, I would have been able to recognize he's
Yeah.
just not a safe leader for me. Again, I
Sure.
didn't know.
Sure. For sure. Well, so I guess take me through, because I have one more of the life sentence, but it's going to apply later. So I'm going to hold off. Maybe take me through your lowest point. Like, can you still remember maybe the darkest place you were in this journey, the lowest point? Take us through maybe a little bit of some of the lowest of lows to the degree that you're comfortable, obviously. But if it's in the book, I assume you're comfortable with it. So whatever's in the book, and then I have a question after that. But give us context to try to maybe pull the audience into those moments with you at the lowest.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So how my low points always started for me was rapid fire negative thoughts about myself. They would be, you're useless, you're a bad leader, you're a bad husband, you're never going to amount to anything. They would come at me faster than I can even say them to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like, in football, when there's a fumble and the poor guy who gets the ball is on the bottom of the pile,
Yeah.
I was that guy. I had the football, but I wasn't sure if it was worth having because I had 500,000 pounds on top of me. That's what it felt like. So, so in, I guess we can just move to 2020. Um, I, I felt like I was doing okay. I can look in retrospect and see that I really wasn't, but I felt like I was doing not great, but okay. We were sitting downstairs in the living room with the family, and I had this thought pop in my head, and it said, "Your life is never going to be a good life. It is always going to be terrible. You should go upstairs, take all those pills that you've got up there, and just end it. No one will miss you." And I just sort of, I was so stunned by the clarity of the thought, and it felt like a thought that seemed true. I just went with it, bro.
Well, can I ask a question? So leading up to
Yeah.
2020, in the, I don't know, months and a few years leading up to that, had you experienced significant setbacks in your career, in your relationships, friendships? physical health? Had you had any reason leading up to that to believe those thoughts might be legitimate?
It's a really good question. So I have suffered from what are called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures,
Okay.
which is a fancy way to say my brain doesn't do the things that normal seizures do when you have seizures.
Mm.
So there's no abnormal brain activity, but the body still looks like a seizure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've been out on disability for coming up on a decade now. And it was monumentally challenging for me to go from I was making six figures. I was traveling about the country talking with C-suite level employees of other companies, consulting for them. And then in a moment, all of that was ripped away from me. And I was having 4 or 5 seizures a day on average.
And those seizures just came out of the blue. And are they
Yeah,
hereditary, given what you were saying about your mom? Or did they pinpoint that that's hereditary, that you somehow in your genes seizures are there?
that's what's so weird about psychogenic seizures is that mo so no one really 100% knows where they come from,
Okay.
but most people believe that it's not genetic and it's a function of a traumatic event that you
Okay.
haven't processed well. So
Hmm.
our best guess is that some of the crap I went through before my parents got divorced
Okay.
sort of set me up for these seizures. But we never
Gotcha.
identified a trigger point. Like usually there's a trigger point,
Yeah.
and then everything sort of falls to the wayside after that. There wasn't a trigger point,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I was having to process through a ton of identity issues.
Yeah.
I think as men, it's really easy to identify your job as your identity or your salary as your identity
Mm-hmm.
because we invest so much time in those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all that taken away from me, and it was rough.
And did COVID, so up to 2020, whenever when you're talking about that voice that you heard, was COVID, we were right in the middle of COVID. And so obviously everybody
Mhm.
was dealing with their version of, maybe frustration, anxiety, hopelessness, dip depression. So then you heard that. So then so you heard that voice and you're like, what is happening? Right. And so take us through.
Yeah. And literally I just quietly walked upstairs, took about 100 pills, a bunch of different pills. And 3 days later, I woke up in the psych ward. Um, and my overwhelming emotion when I came to was anger. And I thought to myself, dude, I can't even kill myself right. What a loser. And I stayed in that place of
Hmm.
total overwhelming, self-deprecating agitation and anger for another 3 or 4 days. And then the shift that we sort of teased earlier happened. I was sitting in the break room. I was watching some cinematic masterpiece like Rambo 17, and I felt a quickening in my gut, like God wanted to say something to me. I had no idea what God might want to say to post-suicidal Chris, but I knew that I needed to not be watching a Sylvester Stallone movie while that was happening. So
Sure.
I went and I sat in my room, and the Holy Spirit, clear as day, said to me, "Chris, I still love you."
Mm.
And I argued with him. You can't love me. You don't know how. Do you understand what I've just done?
You didn't even love
I'm
yourself, right?
yeah. That I don't love myself. My family's mad at me. I don't even want to be here. You can't love me. What are you talking about? You love me. And I, you know, quick tip: if you're ready to argue with God, you're always going to lose.
Sure.
Um, but I was ready to argue with God, and He didn't engage me in any way with any of my arguments. He just said again, "Chris, I still love you." And 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 John, it hit different that time. It's like it healed something that was broken in my spirit. And I realized if the God of the universe, who literally knows everything about me, literally knows how dark my times have been, literally was there when I took those pills, listening to that crazy voice without questioning it. If he communicates, I still love you, there must be something worthwhile left. And that's sort
Especially,
of, go ahead.
especially when you've given him every reason to not, right? Like you've given him
Right.
every reason to bail out on you, and he still didn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
And then to sort of bookend that, and this is, so I have both good and bad experiences with the church. I shared the bad.
Sure.
I want to share the good because it's foundational and formational for my
Mm,
life. The next day, my pastor came and visited me in the psych ward. And I'll be honest, John, I was sort of freaking out because the last time that I had a conversation with the pastor about depression, I wasn't in a psych ward and he read me the riot act.
yeah.
I was like, man, I don't even want to do this.
Different guy
And
though, right?
de-
Different guy. Yeah.
definitely a different guy. Yeah.
Well, let me
A
ask you
different
just
church.
so I feel better about myself. Now I can ask this question because I know this is where you're going to go and it's going to feed right in perfectly. But I was going to say, what was the best advice you got during your low period or the best encouragement that you got during your lowest point? So maybe that leads us right here with the pastor coming into the psych ward.
That's exactly where we're going. So
Cool.
we small talked for a couple minutes. That was awkward. How are you doing, Chris? I'm in a psych ward. How do you think I'm doing? You
Yeah,
know, how's the food? Really? The food? He didn't actually ask me that question. I'm sort of making light.
for sure.
But we small talked for a little bit. And then I saw his demeanor change. And I'm like, oh no, here it comes. He's going to beat me down. And he just looked at me and he said, Chris, we can't have this happen again. That the church isn't the whole church without you in it. And
Woo.
God's not done writing your story. I'll never forget those words.
That's powerful.
That there is leadership in you and on you. There there are communication skills that you've got. There is a destiny that God's calling you to, and there's a destiny that our church is being called to. And we can't get there if you're not in it. I need you to not give up.
It's great.
And it was like in the same way that God sort of restored hope to my soul through the Holy Spirit with that I still love you. My pastor Marty restored me to a place, to community, and saying, hey, this church isn't giving up on you. Just like God didn't give up on you, we're not giving up on you either, man. Keep going.
Yeah. And we always look, the hindsight's 2020, obviously, but had that guy been your pastor when you were 20 or,
Oh, yeah.
when you were first walked in with that first encounter with a pastor, but again, had that happen, like we wouldn't be here. And so you had to really trip over a lot of things to get to this place, which God's going to glorify it anyway. And he's going to, he doesn't waste anything. So all the pain and trauma isn't going to be wasted clearly because now you're writing books and speaking. And, I love the name of the book, really. I mean, the psych ward, that's clickbait for sure, right? People are going to be like, wait a
Right.
minute, what? This guy's in the psych ward, what? And so how long did you spend in there?
I've had two separate stays for about 10 days each. In 2018, I had another moment
Hmm.
where it was a very similar sort of thing. And I had that chapter in the book is called something like When Gritty Friendship Saved My Life. I called a friend and I was like, hey, I'm not okay. I'm really suicidal. And I'm going to give you sort of the short
Yeah.
version of it.
Yeah.
He, uh, he basically kept me on the phone until he got to the house. He was, at the time, he was a chaplain at a mental health facility. So he was assessing me while we were on the phone, sort of realized that I wasn't okay, and then helped me check into a psych ward. I was there
Okay.
for about 10 days.
Okay. So I mean, there were signs of this, coming. And I mean, I guess I'm glad why, let me ask a crazy question. Why didn't you call somebody that second time? Because in
I don't know.
2018 you called and I will say that's a big move. Like not a lot of people would do that in that moment. That's pretty
Yeah.
honorable that you would call because you were aware enough to know you were in a bad place. I'm just wondering, did you just not had you separated from those connections 2 years later, or did you still have those same people you could have called, but the moment was too heavy?
I think I definitely had the same people. The moment was just too heavy for me. I
Mm,
was I was so convinced that my life was never going to be worthwhile because of that voice just felt so true.
hmm Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't speak empathetically about that, but I mean, I can imagine. Well, I can speak to a degree because we all fight a spiritual battle, right? We all have a spiritual enemy, and there's a supernatural realm we can't see where there's an enemy coming at us. So I've had those moments of the lies just seem too real to not be
Yeah,
true, right? And so
yeah,
you get kind of swept in the undercurrent of that, and sometimes you just can't get out of it. I hear you. But no, it's commendable that you called somebody in 18. And I mean, I get it. 2020, you're probably just like, okay, this must just be supposed to be my destiny. This is for me. Like this is just hopeless and I can't get out of it. But I mean, God, man, it's impressive that you've overcome so much, and God still has a plan. And that pastor who came in 2020, man, would you say he changed the trajectory of your life?
yes, 100%.
Yeah. And so what are you doing? Like when did you decide that this book was going to happen?
Um, it's a good question. So
Post 2020, obviously.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of funny the way that this book happened is we had pitched a different book to Bethany and they liked my writing. So they went onto my website and did some research on me and
Mm,
saw that I had a speaking session called Resilience and Other Things I Learned in the Psych Ward.
okay.
And they said, we'd like to see the book behind that speaking session. Can he write that book instead?
Mm,
So
okay.
it sort of came out of an unexpected turn of events.
Okay.
I would I mean I was wanting to write it, but I suicide is a tricky topic in Christian circles. People are afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
There's lots of weird, is it the unforgivable sin sort of dynamics? It's
Right.
not, but
Correct. Correct. I don't read anywhere in the Bible that there is one that
right.
that's beyond forgiveness. Okay, so help me with dads of teenagers now. And selfishly, I get to benefit from this. So we do live in a world where I would think society or teenage suicide is probably at the highest point it's ever been in the last five
Yeah.
years, let's just say. A, what can you attribute that to in your opinion? Now, before you answer that, are you a licensed therapist? It says you're a
I'm
certified,
not.
okay, but
I'm
it
a, I'm
says
a
you're a
certified
certified
mental health
mental
coach.
health
Yeah.
coach. Got it. Those are different, obviously,
Yeah.
but I mean, life experiences and things you've learned, I would think you're qualified for sure to answer this. So, what do you think the reason is that we're at a heightened level of suicidality in the teenage world? Um, and then what are parents missing? What signs are parents missing? Can you speak? I know you can't speak for every parent, but in your opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of factors. Some of this is going to sound familiar, maybe like old hats. Um, the unhealthiness of social media is a really huge component, and what makes it such a big deal is that it's always there.
Mm,
Like, you and I, when we were growing up, there were always kids that were being bullied, but then they'd go home
sure.
and and those bullies wouldn't follow them into their bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, Well, now with social media, the bullies follow them wherever their phone goes, which is everywhere. So there's no, you combine it with the responsibility that a lot of teens and young adults feel to inform the social media world about what's happening in their life.
Yep.
And it creates an always on environment that's really dangerous. So the FOMO, fear of missing out. It used to be like, hey, if you didn't get invited to a friend's party, you might hear about it on Monday and you'd be sad about it. But like nowadays, everyone's tagging one another while the moment is happening.
Yeah.
So there's an immediacy to the fact of not being included in events. I think that's part of that. I think in a post-COVID world, dude, COVID broke something really significant in all of us,
Mm-hmm.
but especially with young adults. The the coping skills that are developed in community, in high school, in junior high, even as unhealthy as sometimes those places are, were just gone for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, what it was replaced with was isolation at a time in some of the most formative times for these young adults, for these teenagers.
Yeah.
They were isolated and they didn't have face-to-face interaction, and even some of the positive mentoring that can happen with teachers and with coaches, all of that was just kaput.
Yeah, I think
So
you're
those,
right too. It sounds little too simple for us to sit here and say we could almost cut the teenage suicide by 60% if we just did away with phones. Like it sounds to me though that we might be onto something. Okay, let's agree that'll never happen, right? We know that'll never
right,
happen. But then
right.
you factor, like you said, COVID in, and I think so we got disconnected, but then we stayed connected virtually because we had all this social media, but then we were the victim of what you said earlier, the bully never goes away, and there really wasn't always anybody to turn to for help when the bully was just always in their ear, right? Or even if it wasn't a bully, it was the FOMO. I'm comparing myself to people that are out there doing this or that have this and I don't. So, I'm just less than, so I'm going to just whatever. It's not worth going on. So they kept seeing all these negative reinforcements, right? The self-fulfilling prophecy of I'm just never going to be anybody that anybody wants. And that just kept getting reinforced. I think it's just I don't know, I feel like the phone thing is a big deal. And I know phones have been around a lot longer than 5 years, but it just seems like everything's magnified and just multiplied tenfold in the last 5 years. So what do parents need to do? I mean, the easy answer is set boundaries with technology. Okay, I get it. But that isn't probably 100% effective to prevent all this. So what else could they be better at?
I I think one of the things that we did well with our kids, my kids are all in various stages of launching, 19 to 28 years old. So I have several that were affected by COVID, and one that, well, he was affected by COVID, but he was already launched into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, different for him. But I
Mm-hmm.
had three kids, one in college, two in high school, that were affected by
Yeah.
COVID. And of course, the technology thing is omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've done is, and this sounds almost silly or unrelated, but really just without an agenda, sitting down and forcing a regular conversation around, hey, what's new in your life? Not not trying to find a teachable moment, not trying to correct them, just engaging in their life. Because like you said, so many teens feel like they have nowhere to turn.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do as parents is we want to communicate, hey, when you have nowhere to turn, I'm here and I care and I accept you, and nothing you say is going to change the way that I view you. It's been said that for most kids, their parents are their first sight line into who God is. So
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that we can reflect to our kids that same thing, to go back to my story, that God reflected to me when I was in the psych ward. Hey, I still love you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're messed up right now. It's okay. Dude, we all are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's this transition that happens around 12 or 13 where, that the strict yes, no rule setting kind of parenting sort of becomes increasingly less effective. And what becomes increasingly more effective is relational interactions, not as equals, but
No.
as friends. And if we can create that safe space, and something that I've been doing with my kids, especially recently, is just asking real honestly, hey, how's your mental health right now? Just ask the awkward question.
What do you get from, because I hear you and I think that's a good question, but I mean if they're like my teenagers, it's like, yeah, it's fine. Or yeah, it's good. Right? I mean, I don't know how many teenagers are really super open about it when they have issues, unless I'm pretty hyper pressing because I can tell there's something going on. So I won't just let it go at fine. But,
Yeah,
some parents are like, okay, fine. Okay, cool. Then it's fine. But it's really not fine. So have you ever had to dig a little further when you ask that question, how's your mental health? And you get fine? Have you ever had to go a step further?
for sure, for sure. Like when the kids were still living with me, I would say, well, the reason I'm asking actually is because you've been, whatever, maybe a little standoffish. You've been in your room a little bit more than usual.
Okay.
Your grades are slipping, and you're saying you're going to do homework, and you're gaming. All those things are for you
Mm,
indicators that you're sort of off kilter a little bit.
mm-hmm.
And and hey, let me just reiterate, I'm not going to judge you or think any less of you. I'm just concerned for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do? And sometimes that question, is there anything I can do to
Mm-hmm.
help, is a question they're more willing to answer.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely takes time, John. It definitely
Yeah.
takes a pattern, a history of asking these sort of questions. Like the first time I asked the question, my son was like, "What do you mean, how's my mental health? I'm fine. I gotta
Mm,
go."
yeah. Do they know your story?
Oh yeah,
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that would be a valid reason for you to be asking those questions, right? I mean, you kind of have a resume to back that up a little bit and make you more credible. Um, well, so I guess in Christian circles specifically, I feel like we're trying to keep up appearances, right? And some parents may not want the pastor or the church or the bridge club, right? Or the women's tea group, small group, Bible study group to know that little Johnny's dealing with anxiety or depression or panic attacks. Talk to that parent right now. Maybe give them a little hard truth, hard love, tough love. I don't know how you maybe get somebody's attention that's in that camp other than to do what the guy told you 25 years ago, man up and pray more. Don't say that.
yeah,
But what's your advice to that group?
yeah. I think this is hard advice. I think that what what has to happen is there has to be a willingness to put true healthiness in front of appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to learn to, I mean, obviously not every conversation is going to be appropriate to have with the bridge club, to use your example.
For sure.
But if we're worried about, well, what is Susie going to think if my son Tommy is having anxiety? Our priorities are out of whack.
Right.
And there's really no other way to say it other than that.
That's right.
Our priorities are backwards. Our top priority for our kids as parents should be to, in every way possible, prepare them to succeed as adults. And part of that includes mental health, especially in today's society.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it's not just kids that are struggling. I read a mental health brief by the World Health Organization that was released in 2022. It said that in a post-COVID world, worldwide incidences of reported anxiety and depression have increased by 25%. That's a shocking number, especially because it's reported cases. Who knows how high the real number is?
Was there an
These are
age group
all,
on that? Did it show an age group, like an average
it
age?
was, no, it was like 18 to 70. It was everyone,
Really? Okay. I was thinking,
everyone.
so as you're saying that, I'm thinking, you know what you don't hear about, and eliminate all the like literal diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, those kinds of things. Eliminate that. But people over the age of 60, you don't always hear about them having insecurity issues or depression issues, or, maybe
Yeah,
isolated in a nursing home. Maybe they have more. But I'm thinking that age group, that generation, you know why? Because they're not technologically bound, right, to a device. Like they're not dependent. So I'm thinking, I bet you that generation doesn't deal as much with depression as maybe the 20s to 50s, right? You and I, and a little younger than us, but I don't know. Maybe I'm off. I don't have anything to back that up, but I think it's interesting that you're talking about 25 out of 100. That's crazy, man. That's a lot, and that's just
yeah,
reported. That's
yeah.
crazy.
And that's worldwide. That's not a US thing either. That was the entire world.
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable the way that when I say COVID wrecked us, bro.
Yeah, but I can't, the more we talk about that and the more you think about, the terms you hear, shamdemic, right? And how this was manufactured. And I hate to give it that much power because I know there was somebody behind this whole conspiracy, in my opinion. And I'm not just one of those fear mongers that thinks everything's a conspiracy, but I mean, I think there's proof that some of this was manufactured. But anyway, I hope that as a society we don't stay bound by that, right? That COVID wrecked us. So
Right, right.
what lessons, because your book title is Lessons About Depression, right? Excuse me, lessons about suicidality. So how are you more resilient now? Since that's the title of the book, I'm going to make you put your money where your mouth is. How are
Sure,
you
sure.
more? There's no doubt you're redeemed. That's obvious. We can get any page of the Bible out and prove that. But how are you more resilient?
I had to make the decision after 2020 to do whatever work was necessary to set the right boundaries in my life so that the next time I heard a suicidal intention voice, I could recognize it for what it was, not accept it at face value. So that
Mm,
looked like a few things for me. Um, I I was not regularly seeing a counselor. I had reasons for that. I've had more negative experiences with counselors than I've had with pastors.
yeah. Okay.
Um, uh, so I made a poor decision because of that to step away from counselors when in a time in my life where I really needed someone to help give me the toolkit that was necessary for me to be able to function.
Well,
A
I'd be
couple of
interested.
really,
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I probably apologize for interrupting you, but on that point, if you're on disability, then you're dependent in order for it to be paid for. If they're willing to send you to counseling, you're at the mercy of who they choose. Am I right?
well, my I have my insurance through my wife,
Okay,
my
okay.
health
So you
insurance
can
through my wife,
pick
so I have a
you
little
can
more
pick a
liberty. Yeah,
counselor. Okay, okay. I wondered
yeah.
if you were, because that's a big
Thank
problem.
God.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
problem. What if you were at the mercy of the system and they were just
right.
throwing you into some free counselor that's just some random, so anyway, but you've had a negative experience even with those, which that helps me to understand that I need to push my son further into what he wants to do, which is Christian counseling. He wants to be a licensed Christian therapist. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
that's amazing.
want to push him right into that because from what I hear you say, there's a need for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
So, so a couple of the things that I really struggle with specifically, there's a term, it's called catastrophizing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fancy word for making a mountain out of a molehill.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn how to back away from the catastrophizing and interrogate the thoughts that are coming into my head to see if they're necessarily true. So there's a few questions that I would ask. That was the first one. Is it necessarily true that this thing I'm worried about is
Mm.
going to happen? And then another question is, are there other things that are equally likely that could happen that would be less catastrophic?
Mm-hmm.
And then what is the likelihood of each one of these things happening, sort of playing the odds?
It's good.
And then there's several other questions from there. So I'm slowing down that process of that piling on that we were talking about with the fumble,
Yeah.
the piling on from the very beginning. I had to learn fundamentally how to slow that process down.
Yeah.
So, instant replay. I now have instant replay in my brain.
Well, I was going to say you started playing offense more than defense as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Like you aren't the victim anymore. Like you're in
yeah.
charge of those thoughts. And you tell them how fast and how many and how heavy they're going to be, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
That's
I tell them to
that's
get in
great.
line one at a time, and
Yeah,
every single one at a time, I walk through these questions.
that's
Is it
great.
necessarily true? Is there another option? What is the likelihood of these things taking place? And then the other one that is really important that I forgot to mention, that the fourth question is, what can I control in this situation right now? Because
Hmm.
that gives me a sense of empowerment back. Again, speaking to not playing the victim.
Yeah.
Because sometimes circumstances are just, I mean, sometimes an anxious thought might be, well, my mom's late. I hope she hasn't got into a car accident.
Yeah.
Well, that question of, is there anything I can do about it right now? It might feel like a no, but really it's, well, I can call her. I can call my mom. She has
Right.
Bluetooth on her phone, and if she answers, then she's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, that is empowering to people. I mean, we could even I mean that would translate to any area of life, I think, not just people that have maybe a bout with, you know, catastrophizing things. Like anybody, like, can you control it right now? Can you impact the future of that thing you're thinking right now? No?
Yeah,
Okay, well, then let's back her down a little, okay? And let's put it in neutral here because we're going off the rails. But no, I love it, man. I think we've covered a lot, and this hour flew by, man, and I've enjoyed getting to know you and your story because, I mean, let's face it, I knew nothing other than what little brief snippet I read about your book, and thanks for
yeah,
unpacking those stories and reliving some of that. I know you're trying to separate from some of those stories, but at the same time, if you can pull things out that might keep somebody else from going down that same road, I know that's what you're all about. So,
absolutely.
um, what a great book this is gonna. I mean, I can't wait to see the reception. I hope it sells millions of copies, man. But it is available now to purchase, right? If you're listening to this in real time, this will probably be out in a couple weeks. So I would say maybe 1st of June this episode will release, something like that. Um, so yeah, I'm excited, man. What else can we do to see some of your materials and maybe look at if anybody wants to have you come speak? So where should we send them?
Oh, sure. You can go to chrismorriswrites.com. That's WRITES.
Okay.
And that's sort of my homepage online. You can find out everything
Okay.
about me there.
And do you have another book also? Like, have you written more than one book? I saw you in some Instagram stuff. You were holding up a book, but I don't know if it was like a devotional or did you have another
Yeah.
material that you wrote?
Yeah, I wrote a devotional called By Faith.
Okay.
It walks through Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, with an eye
Cool.
toward perseverance,
Cool. Okay.
because I think that, if you look at a lot of the heroes of the Old Testament, we see that they either didn't get everything that God promised them or didn't get anything that God promised them.
Sure.
but yet they held tight to faith. And I think that message of perseverance, of waiting for God to give us something that's been promised,
Yeah.
is a really meaningful promise for us today.
Yeah. That's good. Well, good, man. I appreciate you. Keep writing, keep doing what you're doing, keep creating content that encourages people and empowers people. Because this mental health situation is not going away, and we need more voices and more people out there serving like you are. So I appreciate it. Audience, with that, he has been the one and only Chris Morris. We've been last in line. Be blessed.